Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the HR Voices podcast. I am your host, Mary Asante, and with me here, I've got my co-host, Charlotte Allfrey, and Emma Cleary, who is our guest speaker today. Emma, lovely to have you on our podcast. And we will be talking today about flexible working and the impact on the workplace, so on employees and employees alike. And we will be also looking at how HR consultants can generally facilitate flexible working in the workplace, or HR and people professionals can facilitate that. So welcome.
Thank you.
I'd like to add that Emma is a very, very first guest on the HR Voices podcast. So we are incredibly privileged to have you. And
well, I'm very honoured that I'm the first guest, Mary.
Great stuff. So just to start off, if you can give us a very brief introduction about yourself, about who you are, so that our listeners or our viewers can actually know a bit more about your background.
Okay. So my name's Emma Cleary, and I'm the founder and director of Flexibility Matters. I've been working in the flexible working space for about 9 years now. And we have recruited and made jobs flexible in all sorts of different ways and shapes and forms, from the standard full-time with flex to part-time, term time, reduced hours, condensed hours, compressed hours, and also because flexible working, as you guys know, comes in every shape and form, and it definitely differs by person and by business how a flexible working arrangement works. So yes, 9 years of really sort of banging the drum of why flexible working works. And you know, pre-pandemic, that was a trickier conversation than it is now. I did a radio show yesterday, and I was telling people about a networking group that I'd been to where pre-pandemic, people would actually turn their backs on me because they didn't want to talk about their flexible working policy because they didn't even have one. And it was an area of HR that they kind of sort of shied away with because they didn't really believe it worked. And they certainly didn't want to be shamed into the fact that they were just paying lip service to flexible working. And then the pandemic came around, and we found that the whole way that we work, what people's expectations are, how amazingly well it works, has been the most enormous test case ever run. And the upside of that is that flexible working is something that everyone wants to talk about. So it's great to be in the world of flex at the moment.
Excellent. We can quite comfortably say that you are a pioneer in that area and a strong advocate for flexible working for nearly a decade before it's become a reality for most of my nation.
And yes, I can't believe where the 9 years has gone, actually.
Yeah. And I can totally relate to the bit where I sat in interviews where candidates have asked about flexible working, and then in the past, employers will go, "Oh yes, we offer flexible working," but the reality is they didn't really want to. It was lip service more than a reality of practical flexible working, so to speak.
I think that's what we've noticed a lot, is that pre-pandemic candidates would say, "Well, when do I talk about flexible working?" And we would try and reassure them that the reason that they were registered with our flexible recruitment agency is because we will broker the flex for them. And that was the same pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. You know, we will always broker flex. We will make sure that it works both sides, because flex has to work for everybody. But I think that the thing that I've noticed most recently is that the whole flexible working discussion is bound up with a cultural discussion, because it's all very well talking about flexible working, but if you get into a business that really doesn't support that flexible culture, even though the pandemic's been and gone and we're on the other side of it now, if someone's expecting something that the business as a whole doesn't hold dear to itself, then it won't work. So the whole cultural piece is also close to our heart, because we don't want to put people into businesses that really don't support flex, because it won't work.
I think that's really important, actually, and I think I've had a lot of experience with that with clients of my own, in that there's a real need to shift your mindset as a business owner from, time on the clock to productivity and getting the work done and how that's measured. And I think that's quite key, because if you don't make that shift, then actually you're still always potentially looking for the number of hours delivered, and whether people are, on duty, off duty, at their computers, and their teams is showing them that they're there and present. So, it's about whether it's presenteeism or actually whether they're just getting the work done and they're being allowed to flex within that.
I suppose that when you've got part-time hours, we work with a lot of working parents that, if they're working a half a week or 30 hours or something like that, they are amazingly productive, because they know that within the hours, the tasks they have to do need to get done. So they're on it from the moment that they're, I think, back in my corporate life, there was an enormous amount of time wasted, because you would wander around, you could look busy, you could be at your desk, you could have those water cooler moments and all the rest of it, but you weren't necessarily any more productive than someone who was working sort of 25, 30 hours, because you were present, but you weren't actually engaged. And what we find is that, if you believe and trust in the people you've hired, and you've hired right for the right job, for the right person in the right company, you've got to let them go. You've hired a grown up. You don't need to tell them or manage them every moment. They will deliver. But that, there are still people out there who think presenteeism is the only way to manage. And, it throws an enormous question. Well, I think that the beauty of what I've seen through this awful human tragedy that we've all lived through is that businesses are paying more and more attention to their vision and their purpose and their culture. So we can work with many really nice companies, and we can actually avoid the ones that are literally paying lip service to get talent, because they're going to get found out. And, the companies that are paying lip service are going to lose their talent, because there's many companies out there who are really doing a great job on making themselves very, very diverse and inclusive. And obviously flexibility is part of that whole HR sort of range.
You've touched on a number of very interesting points, actually. One of them being the culture of the organization being right for flexible working. And the other bit is the management style and this whole productivity issue, which is the fact that I'm present in the office and I could be present talking to lots and lots of people all day and not necessarily getting on with the things that I need to do. But I suppose people who oppose and have been calling for people to come back to the office, for example, and be there. Flexible working means different things to different people, and we'll touch on that shortly. But for example, for people who are opposed to hybrid working, remote working, get everyone back into the office type approach, one of their key points is the fact that being in the same space, talking to each other, and then this whole spending time around the coffee machine, etc., facilitates sort of organizational learning. And so very interesting.
I think it is very interesting, because, well, we're very lucky where we are, because we're down near Brighton, and Brighton, I think, is really a hub of best practice in flexible working. And there are good examples in sort of Crawley and going up the M23 into Croydon and out into Surrey and into Kent. But Brighton is a microcosm of micro businesses and SMEs. And I think it would be safe to say that it's easier to be nimble and react quickly when you're in a smaller business than it is in a corporate. But if you then break the corporate up into small teams and you make your charter by team, it can work in exactly the same way. But it can only really work if the senior management team is on board and models best practice and then equips their middle managers with the right tools to manage diverse and possibly remote teams. But I think, when you look at the corporates, how much space they have to fill with their employees and how much of those spaces are actually sitting empty, I can kind of understand why managers want people back in the office because it's such a huge waste of money. But I don't think that should be the dictate over great management, just because you need to fill your space. I do think that if you're going to fill your space with people who are sitting on Zoom or Teams all day, that is a complete waste of effort. But if you're using your space in a different way to collaborate and to meet and make ideas and plans and brainstorm and do all those good things that when that get people sparking when they're in the same place, that's fabulous. So I think to fine tune how you're using your space and possibly reorganize your space so that it works better for a more collaborative working experience is really important. I was talking yesterday about a company that we work with called Paddle. They're a financial services organization and they are remote but have hubs, and they bring their paddlers into paddle huddles 3 times a year, I think it is, maybe 4. And they bring the whole company together to create this sense of purpose and common direction so that everyone feels invested in what a paddle person looks like and how they operate. And there are many examples of that, but I think it's really important that you bring your people together so that you understand what your culture is. Otherwise the culture's lost. Even if you then go away and work in your remote spaces, I think that sort of distilled bond of what a culture is so important, led by and modeled by senior managers. But I think the area we certainly found from our last Flex Forward event that is really tricky to manage is the middle managers having the right tools to manage people who may be dispersed, some who might be working flexibly, some who might be working part-time, some who might be working completely remotely. It's quite tricky to manage those sorts of teams. As your HR consultants, you see it every day as well. It's difficult to manage.
It is, and actually, we will ask you for some of your top tips that perhaps you've gained in your experience over the years to help with that. So I think, you're obviously already seeing in your own experience that things are changing and that the pandemic has really moved things on. Some would say that it's absolutely catapulted the flexible working landscape and how people think about it and react to it hugely. Are you seeing really good evidence of that? Because you're saying that people are now engaging with you more. How is that being experienced by you?
Well, certainly we're recruiting for more companies, which is great. There's an enormous war on talent. It's really tricky to find good people. And we advocate totally that opening your doors to a flexible working arrangement automatically opens a huge new pool of opportunity. Always has done, but now more than ever. I think there's a shocking statistic out there that 8.7 million people of working age are actually inactive, young and older. And we want to get those people back into work. That's particularly on the more mature end, that's such a waste of experience. And I don't know what the actual statistic is of the sort of 50 plus age group who haven't returned to work after the pandemic. But those skills, they need to be roped back into the workforce. And if we can persuade people that you can get hold of those people and that experience, if you are prepared to look at a flexible working arrangement, whether it's working from home or in a hybrid fashion, that's got to be a good way of getting experience back in through the door. And, talking to our intern, she has no desire to go into an office every day. She does most of her lectures online. She does all of her exams online. And she's just like, well, why would I? I come in to be with you guys once a week, and then we are in constant communication. But I think that, the communication piece is massive. If you don't communicate with your people and you don't set them clear and definable tasks with measurable results, then, it's your fault as a manager. But, those tasks are difficult. And if you're managing a team of sort of 40, 50 people, it's a full-on job. And, as we all know, managers are promoted because they're good at their job, their functional job. They're not necessarily all made to be managers.
Yes, that is a very common, especially in industries with specialist skills. You tend to find that people are employed into certain roles, and then as they become more and more experienced and then the expert on those particular subjects, and with time, they potentially will become very expensive in terms of remuneration as well. And people end up in management roles who probably don't have the skills or the desire to become managers. So yes, that is a very common challenge that employers face in industries. We have talked about flexible working quite a lot, but for most people, flexible or flexibility means different things to different people. What is your experience? What does flexibility mean to the people that you help?
So flexibility means something different to every business and every candidate that I talk to. And I think that the sort of catch-all is flexible working is something that's not the traditional 9 to 5 in the office. And that means, as I say, something different to every candidate and to every business. Now, obviously, every business cannot have an arrangement for every single individual. So when we talk to businesses, we talk about what their sort of core practice or core hours or core expectations are, so that we have an idea, and then we broker the flex for the candidate within that sort of remit. But I think one of the things that I've noticed that's still not happening, and, is something that we talk about an awful lot, is that only 30% of job ads have any accommodation for flexible working, even now after what we've all been through with the pandemic. And I was working with one of the NHS trusts, and I said to them, Working Families, which is a charity that supports working families, advocate that you put the prepared to talk about flex on every ad that you run. And they said to us, well, we can't, because we can't truly accommodate flex in every single department, particularly in the clinical departments. We just don't have enough people, because we need to almost double the number of people we have in those clinical wards to make flex work. So we won't do it. So basically they wouldn't do it on any, because they didn't want to set up the expectation. But in the more commercial world, I still don't understand why people don't put salary as well. Salary and flexibility are absolutely fundamental, I would suggest, because it opens up to the right people and to different types of people, maybe with a caring responsibility, the more mature worker, the younger worker, and those 8.7 million people who are sitting inactive at the moment. It's like, why wouldn't you put your hands on those people? So yeah, flex is something different by every candidate and by every, and that's kind of where we differentiate ourselves from other recruiters, because we will work very hard to try and broker the flex for everyone so that everyone's happy and it's a good fit.
I think you've touched on a very important challenge for employers. That is, not every role. I think the reality is not every role can potentially be done flexibly, but most roles can. And
Yes.
create distinction between that and the example you just gave with the NHS Trust. It's a one size fits all because we can't offer it to every role. We're not going to talk about it at all. And so I think there's some work that needs to be done on the part of employers around job evaluation as to what can be done flexibly and to the benefit of both employees and the employer, and what can't be done, and maybe communication around why not, so that people would genuinely understand that, okay, my role can be accommodated flexibly, but maybe Charlotte or MS can't, and these are the reasons why. And I think probably where we as HR and people professionals can really help facilitate some of that within organizational cultures at the various organizations that we engage with.
Do you know, the interesting thing about that particular NHS trust was that they were actually doing amazing work. They were pioneering what they were calling their flexperts. So they had recruited, I think, about 40 people who would be their flexible working champions on the ground throughout the trust. And we went in to train them about how to answer flexible working questions, from the most mundane of, do I have to make a policy, or can I just have a chat with my line manager, which we'd always advocate, wouldn't we? To the most complicated thing of, can I change my contract so that I can accommodate, I don't know, a 3-day week or whatever it was. But their flexperts were just doing amazing work. And they had lanyards, they had signatures, they had training. And unfortunately, they have now run out of money in that particular trust. So we can't go back and do it again. But they were really pioneering something quite special. And I think, to your point, it's such a shame that, one size doesn't fit all. And especially in enormous organizations like an NHS trust, that's kind of where people like you guys on the ground have to help, because one size doesn't fit all. And, and that's why we like to work with smaller businesses, actually, because you can make a difference relatively fast, and people can make decisions relatively fast. Unfortunately, with the NHS, if it has to go to head office and then back down and back up again, it takes months. But at least they were trying. They were really endeavoring to make flex work in a really complicated organization. But I think that the thing that I hope will make a difference will be the legislation that's being pushed through Parliament at the moment by Simon Hollingrake, the MP for small businesses and enterprise. And he will, we all know how glacial things are to get through Parliament. But, the fact that the flexible working task force, along with the MPs and along with business owners who have all, as we have all been through the pandemic, see the benefit now of what flexible working can bring on a whole nationality of commerce, has got to be a good thing again. Let's just hope that there is not a general election before this is signed off, because at last we're making some progress about day one flex.
I think that is very important, and it becoming legislation would also put employees' minds in perspectives, I believe, in terms of when you're recruiting, it will make it easier to factor it into your recruitment practices and then make the conversation a lot more open.
Yeah.
Will feel a bit more comfortable talking about it at a very early stage and not feel they will be penalized for it.
Yeah.
And I do think sometimes it's a shame that organizations are forgetting how the workplace changed very, very quickly during the global pandemic and how people adapted. Yes, there were some challenges. It wasn't all roses. There were some real challenges for some employers and some employees. Not everyone adapted very well, but I think it would be a real shame to punish everybody just because a selected few that didn't quite adapt or work well. And it comes down to the management, being able to manage your workforce and managing people rather than if someone is underperforming or having an issue or anything, managing that individual more than taking the approach of, you know what, because this person is not working out, I want everyone to change their style of working or their
Yeah.
way of working.
I agree. I think it becomes a much more open conversation right from the get-go. And I think what we do have to understand is that with the legislation, it's not a shoo-in that you're going to get the flexibility you want, but at least it's an upfront conversation rather than having to struggle through your first 26 weeks before you can have a conversation about what flexible working looks like. At least you can be upfront. And I think, again, that's where we'll come into our own because, again, we will broker the flex from we broker it from day one anyhow. And I think most organizations that we work with who have a strong culture and a strong management style are doing it anyhow. You know, they're
So
coming to us because you can't get hold of good people. And if we say to them, well, I've got a great person, but she only wants to work 4 days a week, how about it? They're going, bring it on. We're not getting people through the door at the moment. Let's see what a flexible candidate looks like.
I mean, it's such a logical next step, really, isn't it? Because, I mean, in some cases, those conversations are happening at recruitment, but it's almost that they happen in quite late on in the recruitment process, and then it becomes a big surprise for everybody. So
Yeah.
it just, it would save an inordinate amount of time if we actually have those conversations up front and start from that point of view. I mean, all of us have been working mums, and we all understand it. And I know that I have absolutely valued the flexibility I've had over the years with various employers, and that has made me a much better employee.
Yeah.
And it's actually
you
made
go
me
above and beyond, don't you?
absolutely, and it's made us better business owners as well. It goes right the way through; it feeds through. So, my view is that it really does enhance the workplace experience and doesn't harm it. But I know that some of our listeners might feel that actually for their business it might not work for them, or that they feel it might be damaging. So how could we reassure them? What do you think about how it can enhance the employee experience and the employer experience?
I think that the companies that I've seen working best, no matter how large or small, are the ones that actually ask their people what they want. Not because they're going to be given everything they want, but if you listen to your people, if you do your pulse surveys sort of once, twice a year, or, hopefully quarterly, what are your people saying? It doesn't need to be a huge, lengthy survey, even if it's just 10 questions about, are you happy at work? Is the flexibility working for you? Just get that sort of temperature gauge of what's making people happy or sad, productive or not productive. We work with a lovely company called Open Blend, and if someone's work-life blend is off, they won't be working at their optimum. So I think most of the people that I've learned from over the years have always advocated for test, listen, trial, and retest so that you can understand what makes your workforce work well. And if it's off, then try and do something about it, because if your people are engaged, then they're going to be productive. If they're disengaged and disenfranchised, you're not going to have a happy workforce and you're not going to get great work done. To me, it's just not rocket science, and people make it so hard. A little pulse survey. Think about what it is that makes your business sing and your people within it sing. Ask them the question, trial and test and listen, measure it, tweak it. So I think I would advocate to your listeners that just ask the people, and if it's off, then try and do something about it. I don't know. You do this every day, you guys. Do your business owners trial and test? Do they ask?
I think communication is key in the workplace, and it's absolutely key to a lot of what we do. Being clear about what your objectives are, what you're trying to achieve, and also talking to your employees, because there is always more than one side to a story. There's always more than one side to any coin. So really, you have your employer's point of view, listening to your employees will give you a different side of the story.
Mm.
I think you're absolutely right when you say you cannot meet all demands and all needs. And I think employees also need to understand that when you
Yeah.
put a flexible working request in, or when you're thinking about, oh, I only want to work 1 day a week or 2 days a week, you also need to factor in the employer, the impact on the teams, your teammates, and everything else, what you're trying to achieve. And I think most employers wouldn't just say a blanket no to a reasonable request if they can genuinely accommodate that.
And
Because
the idea of going from 5 days to one is pretty unsatisfactory, isn't it? Unless there's a really good reason behind it. Maybe there's a health reason or a mental health reason. Who knows what it might be, but you've got to justify with your why this is a reasonable request. And I would suggest that 5 days down to one probably isn't a very reasonable request. So I think flex has to work both ways. And that's what I talk about with candidates, that it's not take all the time. It has to work for everybody. And one of my mentors in the flexible world has been trying to get people back into his business in London. And they have this your day, your way policy. And, it's a 30-30-30 in the office, out of the office, and then 30% you choose. And that he said that there were about 30% of the workforce of about 150 who weren't doing their 30% in the office. And he actually said that he felt that it was all a bit take, and that over the pandemic, HR professionals have been giving and really on the front line all the time. And now it was the case that people were just almost overstepping the mark, and there needed to be a kind of recalibration, that people were required in the office for 30% of the time, and no contracts had been changed up until that point. But if they were not going to abide by the rules and the principles of everyone having a very much more fluid and grown-up approach to work, then unfortunately he was going to have to get a little bit draconian and say, well, you won't be eligible for bonuses. You will have to have your contract changed. And he said it's amazing how many more people turned up to the office when they were supposed to. It was almost like people had just been pushing their luck.
I think that's an interesting point, because those people are turning up into the office, but are they going to get the best out of them necessarily? Because I do take on board that it feels as if HR people are given. But one of the things that flexibility drive is their well-being. So there is a real balance between an employee's well-being and their productivity. There's almost a direct link between if you are your best self, you'll be more productive. Nothing necessarily shows that working flexibly, remotely, hybrid, or whatever will make you your best self. There's a lot more to it than just the flexibility element of it. So taking a more rounded approach, a holistic approach to flexible working, I think is a much better approach than just a blanket, of course, people are just rushing if they think that their bonus is at stake or their pay is at stake and the rest of them. But the knock-on impact, I'll be interested to know what happens overall later on if performance is necessarily driven up by people being merely present in offices.
I think that particular example, their engagement is so high with their staff that I think people had, there's always going to be someone who would rather be, maybe they're more introverted and they don't want to be in the office. But, going back to our cultural discussion, to have a culture that is sort of ticking the boxes on all fronts, I don't think anyone would disagree that it needs the people. It's not about a building. It's about what people do together that make a culture, as opposed to a building making a culture. Work is a work is a thing to do as opposed to a building to be in. So I totally agree. But, if you're managing 150 people and you're saying, well, 30% is not very much of your working month, I think you can accommodate us because the rest of your life is extremely flexible. And all we're asking is that we turn up for some team meetings and gatherings so that we can create a good working practice and culture.
And
Yeah.
where there is that argument, come in for team meetings, come in for customer meetings, and then to support even more junior staff on certain days or team building activities or any of those things. It's almost, I can't see why people would resist unless they have some serious reason
Yeah.
for not wanting to do that. It's almost a very reasonable request on behalf from your employer to do that. And it will be unreasonable for an employee to go, actually, no, I'm not doing that because I just don't want to come in. I think that is extreme.
I think that was his point exactly, that they, as an organization, they are totally reasonable. He's one of the leading HR people in the country. He said, we are being totally reasonable. And actually, at this point, they are not. And we need to have a conversation.
And I think that's a fear of a lot of employers, particularly smaller employers, because I think if we go back to this idea of bigger companies and lots more people, and perhaps the flexible working patterns can be sort of spread across a bigger organization. In the smaller teams, business owners are concerned about that. I mean, one of the things, well, two or three of the things that people are saying is missing is that idea of learning. So, bringing people on board, induction, and how people learn in the general environment of a workplace. And also collaboration and innovation perhaps is a little bit lacking in the remote working world. So I can completely understand how employers feel scared by it and feel that perhaps it is going to damage their business. And, people I've been talking to, I've got, some clients in situations where they are trying to bring people back just one day a week and they're getting real significant resistance. Potentially, we're going to have to take a similar approach to the person you've just been telling us about, because actually one day a week is not an unreasonable request. And then there are people who have given up their workplaces and their buildings and have gone completely remote and absolutely love it and has no intention of returning to an office. They have away days, they have meetups, they have socials, and it's working. But you can understand how it's worrying for business owners to sort of think, actually, what's going to be the impact on my business?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think if you look at the statistics, productivity during the pandemic was up, although our health and well-being might have been jeopardized. So why not take all that good stuff that we learned in the pandemic and bring it into sort of now life? So, and each business owner and each HR consultant like yourself and people like us just need to advocate that if you're empathetic and talk to your employees and listen to what they've got to say, then generally speaking, you can make an arrangement that works for most people, can't you?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much, Emma. Before we round up, we can sit here and talk about flexible working all day.
All day long.
Have another session another time to expand on today's discussion. But before we round up, what are your top tips to employers on flexible working and to employees as well?
I think what I just said, actually, communicate well with your people. Try and find some middle ground that works for most. Don't be afraid of putting flexible working on your job adverts. And listen to what people, your employees are saying, and trust that they're going to do a great job for you, because most people want to do a great job and go to work because they are good at what they do and want to do a good job for you. And then I think, if you start with those sort of 5 principles, you'll find some sort of middle ground. And if you don't, then we can help, you can help. And, always happy to help broker flex so that it works for the majority. And then we can look at the minority and work out what needs to be done then.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Emma. It's been a fantastic episode and a really informative one. We will include Emma's details, so if you want to get in touch with her, you can get in touch with her. If you have any questions at all, the discussions that we've been having today, would love to hear from you. Please do get in touch. Again, we'll put our contact details there so that you'll be able to get in touch with us. Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.